my name is Damien, and you may recognize me from the Kaufman and Hart play, The Man Who Came to Dinner. Or perhaps in the airport, security checks, because I'm randomly selected like 90% of the flights I go on for extra security screening. I grew up in the States, and my dad was in the military, obviously for the States. And so I do consider myself fairly patriotic. Now, at the same time, I have spent a good portion of my many adult years living here in Canada. And so I see that there's both things to love and things to cringe about from both sides of the border. Back in the 1700s, late 1700s, the colonists decided that they wanted their independence from England, and so they drafted a very tastefully handwritten letter, sent it over to England, and requested their independence. And the Crown said, nah, we don't want to make you independent because we're getting too much money from you on taxes and other things. And so they said, no. Now, the colonists, they weren't happy with that, and in fact, the Crown increased taxes just to teach them a lesson for asking for independence. And so the colonists were like, no, that's not very good, we don't like what's going on here, and they decided that freedom, that independence, was something worth fighting for. Now, were they afraid? Yeah, of course they were afraid. England at that time was the #1 military might in the world, and the colonists were little more than farmers with torches and pitchforks. But they realized it was important. There are some things that are just bigger than us that are worth fighting for. And so they fought and won their independence, and we celebrate that every year on July 4th. And that has paved the way for freedom for many more people for many generations to come. But not everyone was on board with fighting for freedom. There were some colonists who decided to, instead of fighting, that they were just going to hightail it on up to Canada. And Canadians call those people loyalists because they were loyal to the Crown. The rest of us just call them yellow bellies, but that's neither here nor there. The thing is that they came on over, and less than 100 years later, those loyalists were like, oh man, we backed the wrong horse. We want some freedom too. And so they wrote another, a letter, a not as nicely worded letter, but they wrote a letter, sent it on over to England, asking for their independence as well. And at this point, the Crown was like, well, if we say no, those Canadians are going to get help from their brothers down south, the Americans, and we can't handle another whooping from the States. So we'll tell them that they can celebrate their independence, but they still have to be loyal to the Crown, still have to be loyal to the monarchy, still have to have British royalty on their currency, but they can say they're independent. And Canada was like, wow, that's no different than before, but yeah, we have our independence, and they celebrate that on July 1st, which I'm sure is just a coincidence and not them trying to celebrate their independence just before American independence. Anyway, this is not just some pro-USA or even pro-Canadian message I'm trying to present to you today. I'm totally unbiased. I love both countries. We're going to be talking about something a bit more important than patriotism today. Fear. So often we see the courageous men and women in our lives, and from our collective history, as though they were completely without fear. Look at King David. As a scrawny little shepherd boy, he faced a well-trained military giant head-on and won, much like the colonists. But we forget, or we conveniently overlook, that there were many times that David was, in fact, afraid. But he knew to trust in something greater than himself. He knew to trust in his God. And we know this because many of the Psalms were written by King David himself. U.S. President Franklin D. Roosevelt said, "Courage is not the absence of fear, but rather the assessment that something else is more important than fear." In Psalm 34, I'm given to understand that David actually wrote this particular psalm while he was fleeing for his life. Now, you may recall from your own reading and study about the life of King David that at this particular time he was not king. There was another king named Saul. And Saul had grown very jealous of David and wanted to have him killed. And so David is running for his life. He's hiding out in caves, and I'm sure that David probably could have taken Saul if it were a fair one-on-one fight, but keep in mind, Saul's king and he's got all the military, at his command, so it wouldn't have been a fair fight. Not only that, but David didn't want to kill Saul. He certainly didn't want to kill Saul to take his throne. That wasn't the way he felt God wanted him to go about things. And so he's running for his life instead, afraid that he could be found out and killed. And while he's running for his life, while he's living in fear, the words of Psalm 34 are what come to his mind. Now, we're not going to take the time to read all of it now, but I do encourage you to read it on your own time. Read Psalm 34 in whichever translation you prefer. Today, we're just going to look at a few verses that I've picked out from that passage, though. My sincere hope with all of this is that you'll be able to come away with at least this one assurance. You can have freedom from fear. David is running for his life. He's hiding out in caves, and in verse 4 he says, I sought the Lord, and he answered me. He delivered me from all my fears. Remember that David is running for his life at this point. He's in fear for his life, and yet somehow in this time, he manages to say that God gives him freedom from fear, that God gives him peace. How can he say that? Because the peace of God is not dependent on our circumstances. The peace of God isn't even dependent upon us. The peace of God is only dependent upon God. And God is so much bigger and more powerful than anything we can throw at him. He's so much bigger than anything the world can throw at him. Remember that true peace comes from God. And during times of fear in your own life, pray for peace. Pray for Peace. That's a Reba McEntire song, isn't it?
Yeah, it sure is.
I think I heard about it just because of Stampede. They're playing country music.
It's a 2015 song.
Are you serious? You know the year?
Yeah.
All right, that's cool. I'll look it up later.
Yeah.
Jesus said in John 14:27, I am leaving you with a gift, peace of mind and of heart. And the peace I give is a gift the world cannot give. So don't be troubled or afraid. Do you know what album that's from?
Yeah, I think it's on Love Somebody.
Love Somebody, really?
Yeah. It's track 13, actually.
Wow. In verses 17 and 18, David tells us, the righteous cry out, and the Lord hears them. He delivers them from all their troubles. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. I don't know about y'all, but I know that for myself, there have been many times in my life where I've been very grateful that the Lord is close to the brokenhearted. And even though I don't know about y'all, if I were a betting man, I would wager that you probably are familiar with heartbreak. And make no mistake, heartbreak doesn't just happen because of evil women who are cruel to kind-hearted men, although that is the primary cause of it, I'm sure, but it happens for so many more reasons than just that. You can be brokenhearted over the loss of a loved one. And by loved one, I don't just mean in a romantic sense. I mean the loss of a loved one as a family member, the loss of a loved one as a friend. Perhaps you've been brokenhearted even over the loss of a job, or maybe you've been brokenhearted over severe disappointments again and again. I'm sure that at the mention of heartbreak, your mind may have even gone back to some instance, some experience of heartbreak in your own life. You've recalled some time of great heartbreak. And the thing is that often the feeling that accompanies heartbreak is a feeling of distance, of separation between yourself and of God. But as difficult or as frightening as it may be in the moment, remember this: the Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. Or as Eugene Peterson paraphrases it in The Message, if your heart is broken, you'll find God right there with you. If you're kicked in the gut, He'll help you catch your breath. So pray for peace. And when you find yourself asking, what becomes of the brokenhearted? Remember that God is close to the brokenhearted. That's another song.
Yeah.
What becomes of the, yeah.
Jimmy Ruffin.
I'm not familiar with him.
1966.
Yeah, I'm not I know the song. It's a great song. Jimmy Ruffin?
Mm-hmm.
The last thing I want to highlight from Psalm 34 on having freedom from fear is this. It's in verse 19. It reads, "The righteous person faces many troubles, but the Lord comes to the rescue each time." For some people, perhaps even for yourself, when you hear passages like that about the Lord coming to the rescue of righteous people, the thought may come to your mind, well, I'm hardly a righteous person, preacher. I've hurt people. I've hurt the people I've loved. I've broken the law. I don't go to church as often as I should. I certainly don't tithe as much as I should. If only I could be as righteous as King David. If only I could be as righteous as you are, preacher. The thing is that you got to remember, especially when thinking about the Lord coming to rescue you and comparing yourself to others, well, the fact is you've got your troubles and I've got mine. I did that one on purpose. You know the song, "You've got your troubles, I've got mine." What? Who sings that?
I've never heard of it.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
Anyway, you've got your troubles, I've got mine. None of us is perfect. We're all struggling in this world. I don't believe this. Let me remind you of a story about a little-known guy named David. Now, David did some bad things. David had even killed some people. And one day, David was running for his life. He was being chased by the authorities of his time. And eventually, the authorities catch up with him. They take him to trial, and he's found guilty, and he's sentenced to 6 life sentences. I'm speaking, of course, about David Richard Berkowitz, aka the Son of Sam. One day, a fellow inmate began to tell David that God loved him, and that God was ready to forgive him, for all of his sins, even for the murders that he had committed, just as God had forgiven St. Paul of all the blood that was on his hands. It took a while, but David did ask Jesus to forgive him of his sins, to make him a new person, and to give him a place in heaven someday. In fact, Berkowitz has testified that his conversion came shortly after reading Psalm 34:6 for the first time. And you'll recall that that's the passage I encouraged you to read today. Psalm 34:6 says, "This poor man called, and the Lord heard him. He saved him out of all of his troubles." And because the Bible promises that, David Berkowitz has become a righteous person, loving God with all his heart and telling other inmates about the love of Jesus, even to this day. Even King David wasn't always a perfect, brave little toaster, brave little angel. Aside from that time that he allowed himself to be seduced by that temptress Bathsheba, there were other things in his life that he struggled with, other sins, other fears that he struggled with. And yet David could be declared righteous because he reached out to God, and God reached back out to him, and God made David right with him. And that's all that being righteous is. Reaching out to God and letting God make you right with him and make you right by him. And God can do the same for you. God can do the same for anyone. God can do the same for all of us. So trust him. And be free, be independent of your fear. Thank you very much for joining me today and hearing what I have to say. And if you haven't done so yet, my sincere hope, my sincere prayer is that you also will be able to declare your independence, your freedom from fear. And then once you do, well, I look forward to all of us celebrating together soon and very soon. That's another song. Soon and very soon, we are going to see the King. Soon and very soon. How was that?
It was good.
I don't have any fireworks to celebrate, but if you want, we can burn some of these pews.
Yeah, sometimes the smoke gets in my eye, though.
I hear you.